Okay, hello everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you here today, and I know there's a few more joining us right now as well. So my name is Maria, and I'm the Outreach, Widening Participation and Communications Coordinator here at the Faculty of Law. And I run this Exploring Legal Futures webinar series. So again, thank you so very much for coming. So today's today's session is all about the law personal statement, which I know is a topic that students can get really worried about. And so we really wanted to do a session where we break down the personal statement and discuss how to write it effectively and how to make it competitively. And particularly why we wanted to run this session this year is because some of you might be aware that the format of the personal statement, so the structure of the personal statement, is actually changing for 2026 entry. So we're going to go through all of this in detail, okay? I'm just moving to my next slide. And that's a little bit of a slow process, I realize, so hopefully you'll be able to see it in a second. There we go. Okay, sorry, that was being a bit slow. Okay, so you might have seen this slide before if you've come to one of our previous webinars, but it's really important to remind you what the timeline for the application process is. And so whereabouts we are with the personal statement. So what kind of time in that timeline does the personal statement come in? So we've already talked about choosing your course. Hopefully, if you're here, that will be law, choosing your college or an open application, booking your LMAT, your admissions test, and then submitting your UCAS application on October 15th. Reminder, October 15th is the usual date. It might be 1 to 2 days later or earlier, depending on the year. This is basically what it's been like the last couple of years. So it's an indication. So the personal statement comes at this stage. It needs to be sent with the rest of your UCAS application. So if you're applying to Cambridge or Oxford, your personal statement is due on October 15th or whatever that October deadline will be for that year. Okay? So the first thing you might be wondering about is how much does my personal statement actually matter? How important is it? So before we get into that, it might be important to actually talk about what the personal statement is. So if you're in this webinar, it's very likely that you already know, but it's always worth reminding ourselves. So the personal statement is an opportunity for you as an applicant to discuss your interest in the course, as well as the skills and experiences that make you a suitable candidate to study law. So as I mentioned, it is submitted as part of your UCAS application. If you're applying to Cambridge or Oxford, that will be in October. If you're applying to other universities, that will likely be in January. The catch here is that the same personal statement is sent to all the universities that you apply to. So you cannot tailor your statement to specific courses, or you cannot fully tailor it to specific courses. It has to be relevant to all of the law courses that you're applying to all of the 5 universities or providers that you're applying to. The structure will break down in a second, but it is now 3 responses to 3 separate questions, although the maximum character count remains, and that is 4,000 characters. Mind you, that's 4,000 characters. That's not 4,000 words. So it's actually includes spaces and punctuation marks and whatnot. So it's actually a lot less than 4,000 words. And the personal statement is considered throughout the decision-making process. So there is a common misconception that the personal statement is only considered when we shortlist applicants for interview at Cambridge and Oxford. But the truth is that we actually look at it at all stages of the application process. We read it when it first comes to us with the rest of your UCAS application. We read it right before your interview, so we take it into account during the interview itself. And we will also read it after you have your interview when we are considering giving you a place or giving you a rejection. In fact, we will also consider your personal statement if you miss your grades. So if you have an offer from us and you miss the grades, you miss the requirements of that offer, but you're close enough that we are still considering giving you the place, we will also consider the personal statement then. So it really is important throughout the application cycle. Another common misconception is that we don't actually read the personal statement, or that we only skim read the first and the last paragraph of the statement. Again, that is not true in any way, shape, or form. Universities do read through your personal statement, they make notes on your personal statement, and they don't just skim it or even ignore it. It's absolutely a significant part of your application. So do rest assured that we do read it. It's not written in vain. You don't spend all of that time in vain. So again, a bit of a reminder of what information we use to assess applicants. What kind of tool is the personal statement in? So you can see all of them here. I'm just going to put them on the screen first before I start talking. There we go. Oops, sorry, moved a bit too far. So you can see here that we've got the academic record, we've got the personal statement that's highlighted, school and college reference. You might have to submit some written work. You will have to do the LMAT if you're applying to Cambridge or Oxford. Contextual data is taken into account as well. And also, again, for Cambridge and Oxford, you will very likely have an interview. Although not everybody is interviewed, but a lot of people will be. And the personal statement really is one part of this whole. It's one part of the big pie that is constituted by the different documents in your application. And we do consider every application individually. We take all aspects into account. There is no part of an application that we consider in isolation. There is no part of the application that will singularly make or break the rest of your application. And that goes for the personal statement as well. We consider everything holistically before we make a decision. And as I said, throughout the decision-making process, we consider things holistically. So, as I said, the personal statement on its own will not make and it will not break your application. And you can look at this either positively or negatively. Positively, in the sense that even if your personal statement is not necessarily the best, you might not be as proud of it as you would like to be, then that might not necessarily be your absolute destruction. That might not be the last step in your Cambridge journey. There's still other things that can sort of bring up that application. You can also look at it from the perspective that you might have an incredible personal statement, but if your grades or other parts of your application are not up to par, they don't meet our entry requirements, then that is not enough either. So you can look at it however you want, but it will not on its own make or break an application. It is one part of a whole pie, as I said. So that's very, very, very important to remember. So moving on now to think a little bit about planning effective law personal statements. So before we talk about writing, it is important to talk about planning. So this kind of timeline that I have here on the board is a suggested timeline. So this is a timeline that we have that we sort of give students that ask us, when should I start? What is the best time to start writing my statement? But it's not a perfect timeline. It might not be the timeline that works for you. It might not be a timeline that works with your schedule, with your school schedule, your teacher schedule. You might not be, have enough time in your year 12 to do all of those things. That's completely fine. Well, the process is completely up to you, and the timeline of the planning and writing process is completely up to you, as long as you manage to submit that statement by the October deadline. So by the time that you have to apply to Cambridge and Oxford. This is just a suggestion from us. And it is a suggestion that leaves plenty of time for things to go wrong or for things to not work out as well as you would like them to. All right, so we say that in May and June time, so that's May and June of your year 12 or penultimate school year or equivalent, whatever you might be, this is the time to be engaging in super-curricular activities. So this is the time to be exploring the law. And I've got a note there as well about what super-curricular activities are. So these are activities that get you thinking about legal ideas, but they're not part of your school curriculum. So they're not part of your formal education. This can be things like reading books, documentaries, visiting your local crown court. This can be work experience, whatever it might be. Year 12, and especially the later part of year 12, is a really, really good time to be thinking about those activities. Ideally, by the end of year 12, though, you would have done at least some of them. And so this is a good time for you to start reflecting on your activities. So you might have done the actual activities, you might have done the work experience, you might have watched the documentaries, but you might not necessarily have had time to reflect on those. So thinking about what skills you gained, what interested you the most, how did you follow up that interest, what you found surprising, so on and so forth. So this is really the time to maybe sit down, have a little think about what you've done, and have a little think about what you took away from what you did. And we'll see why that process is important in a little bit. So July to September time now is really the time of putting all of your ideas, all of your points in a document or paper, whatever you prefer, and just putting them all in one place and start to draw from those an outline of your responses. So start to draw a bit of a plan for your statement, a structure plan maybe for your statement, like you would do an essay plan, basically. Piece of advice here, do not try and write your statement straight away. Do not try to start from the beginning and move linearly. That might work for you, but it doesn't actually work for most people. It's so much easier to just take everything you've got in your head, all your ideas, all your points, and put them down on one document, and then start drawing out the more significant points, the points you do want to actually mention in your statement from that, and then make a plan of how you will present those points as well. Don't try to do it straight away. It's not going to work, and it might stress you out. It's actually really quite stressful to look at a blank page. So we say usually just put everything in one paper and then start from that on one document. I keep saying paper because I'm a little old, but you probably are using documents instead of paper. And of course, it is the time for you to write your statement as well, potentially kind of to the later bit of the personal statement. Sorry, of that time period. So kind of August, September time. We don't expect you to write your personal statement in July. But please do start writing at some point before September if you possibly can. Otherwise, it will be quite overwhelming if you only start doing everything when you start year 13. But yeah, so this is a time for you to start really, really writing and thinking about things. And then September, October time, so that's about a month before you apply, that is the time to refine your text. So check that it flows nicely. Spelling and grammar do have to be correct, and they have to be good. Check that you've included everything you've wanted to include as well. Just all of the sort of last details you would check, just like you would do in a regular school essay. And it is also the time to give your statement to a teacher or a friend or a parent even for a second opinion. Do ask for that second opinion and see what points they might bring up that you have not been able to identify in your statement, because it's not that easy to pick up on those smaller points when you're looking at something for months and months on it. So it's very good to give it to somebody else for a second opinion. But giving it to someone for a second opinion does also take time. It takes time for them to read it, and it takes time for them to give you advice as well. So make sure you do that well in time. And we also don't want you to apply a week before the deadline. Well, we do want you to apply a week or two before the deadline. Do give it enough time. Don't apply on the day. Don't apply on October 15th. Give it some time for things to go wrong. Hopefully they won't, but just in case. All right. Your first draft will be absolutely massive. You are probably thinking, as I'm describing this, gosh, does that mean I'm going to end up with a document of 5,000, 6,000 words or whatever? Potentially. It might be a bit of a mess, a bit of a rumble, but that's completely fine. A lot easier to put all of your ideas on paper before you start refining. I keep banging on about that point because I think a lot of people are so scared of having a blank page, a blank canvas for the personal statement, and it just kind of overwhelms them. So yeah, really, really important to follow that method if you feel like that works for you. All right, talking now about writing effective personal statements. So you've done your planning, you've thought about your supercurriculars. Now it's down to the nitty-gritty difficult bit. So writing effective personal statements. So I will mention that a lot of the information from here has been taken from the UCAS website that I've linked here as well. But I have modified it quite a lot to apply to law. But a lot of this is the official information because that is the information that all universities will give you. But I've tried to make it a little bit clearer and a little bit more straightforward and applicable to law as well. But absolutely do visit the UCAS website too for all of the up-to-date information and some more advice as well, because I can't include everything in one webinar. Okay, so a question we get so often is personal statements. What does a good personal statement look like, and what does a bad personal statement look like? And so I think personally, and that's the way I've always thought of personal statements, that they can't be good or bad. They can be effective or ineffective. And that's why each personal statement will have different people and different forces that it needs to affect, or it needs to influence, or whatever you want to call it. Obviously, you might be thinking, it's a law course. I'm applying to law everywhere. And that's true. But not every single person will be applying to the same universities and the same law courses. Some people might be very interested in international law, and they're only applying to international law courses. Some of you will be applying to Cambridge and Oxford. Hopefully, many of you will be applying to Cambridge. And so you will also need to talk about that kind of a smaller group teaching and seminar aspect of Cambridge teaching. So depending on the person's universities that they're applying to, depending on their interests, that personal statement might look significantly different. There's no one size fits all. So if you're reading different personal statements, you're looking at examples and you're thinking, gosh, I could never do this. This is so challenging. This is so different to what I've written. Don't worry. Each personal statement is different. There's no perfect model that we kind of compare all of the statements we receive against. So don't let that worry you. What you can do is you can go on those university websites, so the university websites of the universities you've applied to, and kind of have a look. What skills do they usually require from their law students? How is the teaching done? What kind of papers do they offer? What are they looking for in applicants? And then you can have a think about, how do I match those skills? Okay, they're asking for me to have critical thinking. What have I done? What experiences do I have that can match the critical thinking? They want somebody that is really good at essay writing. What have I done to show that I'm good at essay writing? How can I show them that I have practiced this skill, that I have experiences to show that I've practiced this skill? So very, very important you do that. But, kind of try and move away from that wording of good or bad personal statements, because they're not all the same and there's not one perfect model. So it's a bit difficult to describe them in that way, I guess. All right. So, sorry, my mouse is in the way. Let's talk about the new format of the personal statement. And that might be something that has caused you a little bit of stress if you have heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, and this is the first kind of occasion you're hearing about it, then I am sorry to be the one to cause you the stress and to be the bearer of disappointing news. But the new personal statement format is actually 3 questions. So it used to be a longer piece of text, and the longer piece of text was 4,000 characters. It's still 4,000 characters max across all 3 questions. So all 3 of your responses combined have to be 4,000 characters maximum. And each individual response has to be 350 characters minimum, okay? And that's actually not a lot. So you should really be aiming to write more than that for each response. Why the format has changed is to better help students include in their personal statement the content that universities are looking for. It's as simple as that. It's just making sure that it equalizes the playing field in a way, and it makes it abundantly clear what universities are looking for in their applicants, okay, and what they want to hear. So let's try and break these questions up one by one now and talk about specific points you can include, things to think about, and just generally advice about how to approach these questions and make your answers as relevant and competitive as possible. Starting off strong with, why do you want to study this course or subject? So in this case, why do you want to study law? And you'll see that in each of these 3 slides that I have a little bit a small sentence at the top that is blue, and that's basically a sentence explaining why we ask this question. So the reasoning behind choosing this question. So universities want to ensure that you're a good fit for the course, that you will enjoy the course, but that you will also excel in it. They really want to make sure, essentially, that you know what you're getting yourself into. So some of the things we can talk about is, first of all, your motivations for studying law. Were you inspired by a school subject? Were you inspired by a teacher, personal experience, somebody's work that you find fascinating? Is it just a subject you really enjoy? Maybe you're doing your A-level, for example, and you want to research it more and you want to pursue it further. What is your reasoning for studying law? But you also need to show us that you are making an informed decision about studying law. Saying that you're inspired is not good enough. You have to show us that you've got knowledge of the subject, that you understand what the subject is about. And a really good way to do that is by discussing specific subject areas that you either researched yourself or subject areas that you're really, really passionate about and you want to learn more about. You can also discuss specific individuals who have inspired you and whose work you want to research more. But you have to back this up with evidence. It's not enough to say that I want to study law and I want to study international law. It's much better to say I want to study international law because I read this book on international law, or I watched a documentary on international law, or I visited The Hague or something like that. It has to be tied back to something that you did, an experience that you had, that can actually show us, okay, they're saying they're really interested in this topic, but they have good reason to say they're interested. They have discovered that they're interested through their experiences. So make sure you use evidence to back any of those claims up. You can also talk about your future plans in this part of the personal statement. You can tell us what you want to do in your future career, what your career aspirations are, or you can tell us that you want to go on to further study, and if you know, you could tell us what type of further study you want to go into. And the more significant thing here is to tell us how studying law will help you realize those plans. So tell us about your career plans and tell us why studying law is the way forward in terms of realizing those career plans or further study plans. The second question has to do all about your formal education. So universities want to understand what are the skills that you've gained through your formal education that are applicable to law and that will help you succeed in your law degree. So the question itself is, how have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? So things you can mention here is, how do your studies or your training relate to law? You might be wondering, if I'm not in school, what do I mention? Perhaps you're a mature student, perhaps you're an affiliate student, perhaps you're somebody who is not necessarily applying straight after school. So you might be wondering, what type of formal qualification or training do I mention here? We usually say mention the most relevant and most recent academic qualification or formal qualification that you have done. And it has to be a formal sort of qualification that you've done or training course. But mention how that relates to law. Outline the skills you've gained through those qualifications. Super important. The skills that can be transferred to law. That can come from one of your qualifications, or it can come from multiple as well. If you feel like multiple of your qualifications have provided you with law skills. If you're doing A-levels, that might be one of your A-levels, or it might be all three of them. Some skills you can talk about are critical analysis, essay writing, argumentation, inductive and deductive reasoning, all of those important law skills that we've talked about earlier in the presentation that you should have hopefully researched on the different university websites. This is the time to tell us, how did I build those skills through my school qualifications, through my other formal qualifications that I've done. And it's super important, especially for those of you that might not be studying the most sort of obvious subjects. So law at Cambridge doesn't actually have any subject requirements. So we get lots of people every year that might have done sciences, or they might have done things that are not as straightforwardly related to law, like music. So this is really the time to tell us, why did you pick that subject? How has it helped you to study law? And that doesn't mean you have to force an answer of yourself, or you have to tell something that just isn't true, just for the sake of saying it. So if you feel like music hasn't really given you as many law skills, completely fine. Just focus on those subjects that have given you those legal skills, the argumentation, that critical analysis. But this is really the time to be telling us about how your formal education has helped you. And the same goes for relevant educational achievements. You see there that I've underlined relevant. So this could be things like essay competitions, student ambassador positions, committee positions, debating. Highlight those skills that you've gained that are applicable to law. Very, very important. And I'll say that a little bit more on the next slide. But what you're mentioning in your personal statement should be academic, and it should be related to law. Okay, so you might have school achievements that are not related to law. You might have been really good in sports, or a musician of some variety, anything like that. If you can in some way link it back to law, that's okay. But fundamentally, you should be mentioning things that have built those legal skills. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So the next and final question is, what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? And the reason universities ask that is because they want to see that you're passionate about law. But they want to see that you're not just passionate, you're not just saying, I am passionate, and that's it. They want to see that you've backed this passion up, that you've actually explored and taken active steps to explore this passion. So this really is a good time for you to mention super-curricular activities you have engaged with. Again, books, articles, documentaries, taster lectures, mock lectures, work experience. I'm not going to go through the list, but there's so many things you can mention here. Some of the pre-submitted questions we had, very rightfully so, asked, do I have to include a book? I feel like everybody's including a book. Everybody's including a work experience opportunity. You don't have to include anything. What those super-curricular activities are will be different for each person. It's very, very personal what you've done outside of school. And there's no right or wrong super-curricular activities. What we are interested in is the skills you gain, the legal skills you gained, how you reflected on the activities that you've done. So how did you find them interesting? Did they help you form any opinions on the subject matter? What were your thoughts? What did you find surprising? It's so much more important to reflect on those curricular activities, whatever they are, than trying to get the right ones or present the ones you think we want to hear. Okay? Very similar to the last 2 points, please do highlight the skills and opinions and interests you gain out of these curricular activities. Do not mention them Well, do not just, mention them. Reflect on them. And if I bang on about one point in this entire presentation, it will be this. Don't just mention supercurricular activities. Reflect, explain, and explore them. Okay? So put that in your head. You can also mention personal life experiences if you feel like they've developed your legal skills or inspirations. Completely fine if you feel like something happened in your life, you've had personal experiences, negative or positive, that affected your decision to study law, or that helped you build some of the relevant skills. Completely fine. But we recommend it more anyway, to reflect on supercurricular activities instead, because those are things you've actively gone out of your way to do, rather than just experiences that you just sort of happen to have, positively or negatively. So some do's and don'ts about writing a personal statement. So we broke down those 3 questions a little bit, but let's look at some overarching themes. So some do's and don'ts that apply to the entire document, basically, because it's not a text really anymore. It's more of a document. Be honest and write with integrity. So many people say, and I know a lot of the pre-submitted questions for this webinar were relevant to this as well. How do I stand out? How does an admissions tutor who's reading 500,000 applications actually take an application out of the pile and says, this is nice, I remember this one, this is good quality? How do I stand out? And the reality is that you have to be honest. Whatever your honesty is and whatever your truth is, whatever curricular activities that you've done, whatever skills that you've gained, the one thing that will make you stand out is for you to be your authentic and original self. Again, whatever that might be. We can absolutely tell if somebody's trying to say what we want to hear or trying to have fancier or more complicated supercurriculars. We just want to see you as a person, your personality, your interests, your skills. So be honest. Explore your supercurricular activities. Don't just list them. More is not better in this case. Talk about your skills. Talk about their relevancy to law. We usually say, and that's quite a vague recommendation, it can be a bit higher, a bit lower, but a vague recommendation, 5 to 6 really good examples of supercurriculars are enough. This is not a supermarket list of everything that you've done. It's not more impressive if you're listing everything that you're doing. It's more impressive if you're mentioning fewer examples, but with a little bit of development and content on each one. That being said, do make sure that you use supercurricular activities as examples and as evidence of what you're saying in all 3 sections. So I talked a little bit more about them in this 3rd question that I've got here, but actually you need to use them as relevant evidence in all of the sections, in all of your responses, because they really are the one thing that shows that you're interested, that you're passionate, and that you've done your research. So you can focus them a little bit more in the 3rd section if you like, but really you should be using them throughout the statement. And another thing to mention about this actually is that I know I've mentioned quite specific points that you have to mention and that you have to talk about in each of the 3 personal statement sections, but realistically, as long as you mention the content and the points that we want to hear throughout at some point in your statement, that's okay. You don't have to try and fit in the theme of that section super, super strictly to the point where your personal statement has no flow and makes no sense. As long as you're mentioning all of those points that I've brought up at some point in your statement, that's okay. Those questions are more there to help you structure your statement and also to help you actually include the points that we want to hear about. They're not there to give you a very rigid, very strict way of writing your statement. So that's super important to know as well. Take a break from looking at your statement. It's so easy to miss all of the little things that don't work when you're looking at a document again and again and again and again for multiple months. Take a break. Ask somebody else to look at it, or just take like a couple of weeks off or a week off, depending on when you're writing it, and come back to it with fresh eyes. I promise you, it will be so, so different when you come back to it with those fresh eyes than when you first read it. Some don'ts of the personal statement. Sort of already mentioned a lot of these, but don't write what we want to hear. We don't know what we want to hear. We want to see you as an individual, your skills and your interests. Don't provide a list of every supercurricular activity you've ever engaged with. Big question again, extracurriculars. Do I discuss them or do I not? And the truth is, we don't want you to discuss them in a lot of detail. Cambridge in specific will not really read a massive paragraph about your extracurriculars and will not really consider it. So if you're wondering what the difference is between super and extracurricular, super-curricular are those activities that are related to law or, whatever subject you might want to study, but obviously in this case, law. Extracurriculars are activities that you do outside of school but not related to law. So your music or your sport or whatever it is in this case. Don't talk about those in detail. Really focus on those relevant supercurricular activities. If you want to, you can maybe have 2 to 3 lines about what you've done outside of your supercurricular work, but don't spend too much time focusing on those because we will not really consider them. We will read about it, but we will not consider them, okay? Exception is if they helped you develop your organizational or your time management skills, you can mention those, but again, don't focus too much on them. But you can mention them in that case in a little bit more detail. But again, you should be focusing on your supercurriculars. Do not plagiarize other people's research and definitely do not plagiarize other people's personal statements. You might not necessarily be doing this on purpose. It's very easy to read a statement as an example and to see something that you really enjoyed or found interesting and think, oh, I sort of want to include something similar in my statement. And then you forget about it for a month and you might accidentally include the whole thing, not word for word, but all of the points that the other person was making, just because you didn't remember it. So we do suggest that if you are reading personal statement excerpts or examples, that you actually either print them out or again, save them on your laptop and highlight the ones and the bits that you're finding interesting so that you can cross-check with your personal statement that you've not accidentally included anything there that you shouldn't include. And the same goes with research work or articles or books that you're reading. And it's not just us that will get annoyed by this. UCAS itself will check your text. They do have a plagiarism checker when you submit your UCAS application, and it will get flagged if you've either plagiarized somebody else's statement, so personal statement, or somebody's research work of some variety. Don't worry. Obviously, you might be thinking, but personal statements do all sound quite similar because a lot of us are trying to do the same things, and have the same goals. Don't worry, the plagiarism sort of percentage that it has to be is quite high, and we do realize that things like terminology or things like the structure of the statement can be really quite similar between different people. So we do completely understand that. It does take quite a lot for it to be flagged as plagiarism, but make sure you're remaining safe anyway. Right. So last slide from me, actually, I'm realizing I've been speaking at you for quite a while now. Is an effective personal statement showcases your passion, but it also showcases your motivation, and it showcases evidence for both of those things. It's not enough to say, I'm passionate. It's not enough to say, I want to do law or I want to be a solicitor. You have to show us that you've done your relevant research to support that passion, that you really explored law, and this is something that you're sure you want to do. Highlight the skills that you've gained through the supercurricular exploration, as well as the knowledge you've gained through both your supercurricular exploration and, of course, your formal education as well. And, of course, remember, those things have to be related to a law degree. They have to be transferred to a law degree, okay? But we do want to see the skills and the knowledge you already have. And lastly, it explains how you've explored law outside of your formal education. So those are your supercurricular activities, okay? So saying the same things over and over again, I do realize, but I think a lot of those things are quite important. And not every single person gets them right in every single personal statement. So they are worth reminding you. Fantastic. Okay, so I think this should be it from me. This is my email there. If you've got any questions, we're going to go into the Q&A in just a second as well. But if you've got any questions after this webinar, please do get in touch and please do send me an email. I'll be so very happy to help guide you through the personal statement or just give you advice generally about law if that's what you want. I will say, before anybody tries to email me, we can't read your personal statement. So universities can't read your personal statements as applicants. We can't review them, of course. This has to be something you do, okay? So don't ask universities to read your statement. We can give you general advice and general pointers about your statement, and we're very happy to do so. Fantastic. Okay, what I will do is I will stop sharing for a minute, or I will attempt to stop sharing. And I will start with the pre-submitted questions that we've got, but I can see we've got quite a lot of questions in the Q&A box as well, but please do put more questions if you have them there, but I will start with pre-submitted questions that we have first. Okay, fantastic. So Sorry, I'm just scrolling a little bit. There we go. So if somebody asks, if somebody were to focus on 3 or 4 areas of law on the personal statement, should they be fully relevant to Cambridge's law course? So this is a really good question. As I mentioned in the beginning, you are submitting a personal statement that is applicable to all 5 universities that you are applying to, but it doesn't necessarily have to be fully relevant to every single course and every single paper that they teach, okay? We usually recommend try to mention things that are common across the 5 universities, okay? If you're applying to Cambridge, hopefully at least one of the things you're interested in is something that we teach here at Cambridge and something that we do research on here at Cambridge. But not all of your 3 or 4 topics have to be fully relevant to Cambridge specifically. And universities are very well aware that you are applying to 5 different universities and 5 different courses. So if they see something that, is not 100% relevant to them, that's okay. They'll probably realize that you're writing it because you're interested in other courses as well. But yes, if you can try and include things that are as common as possible across the 5 universities, that's quite beneficial. Okay. And the other thing to mention about this actually is for Cambridge specifically, you have something that is called the My Cambridge application. And you might have heard about this if you were in our last session, second to last session. What was I trying to say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But basically, this is a form that you have to submit to us about a week. It's due about a week after you apply, after you submit your UCAS application. And it's basically a way for us to get some more information about you that is not on the UCAS application. So primarily things like your class sizes, topics that you've studied at school, things like that. But one bit of that form is a mini statement, a mini personal statement, if you wish. That's much smaller than your main personal statement. You don't have to write it. There's no advantage or disadvantage to writing it at all. But it might be a way to allow you to talk about the Cambridge course or specific things that you're interested in the Cambridge course that are not found in the other universities that you're applying to. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. You can do that as well if you feel like you want to mention something that might not be as appropriate for your entire personal statement, basically. Somebody's asking, how relevant is work experience for box 3? I imagine you mean section 3 by this. Work experience is not required at Cambridge and most universities teaching law. You can do it if you so wish, but it sort of serves as a super-curricular. So again, if you feel like it's relevant evidence to one of the points you're making, or if you've gained some legal skills that you think are important mentioning, you can absolutely mention it. And you can either do that in the 3rd section, or if you feel like it better supports one of your points in the other 2 sections, you can mention it there as well. But it's not a necessary requirement in any way for the Cambridge course. So even if you don't have it, completely fine. Don't worry about it at all. Okay? A little bit is about how you can make your personal statement original. I've sort of already touched on this. Be yourself. Don't try to use fancy words or fancy terminology or really complicated and difficult to reach work experience. Just be yourself and mention the skills that you've gained and the specific interest you have, and that will make you stand out. All right, I think I can move on probably to the live questions now. We've got quite a lot of time, so I'm hoping I can get through a few. How strict is the personal statement character limit enforced? Yeah, that's a very good question. Super strict. You can actually not submit your UCAS application like physically on the platform. You cannot submit it unless you are on the 4,000 character limit. And I know that because I personally had miscalculated how many characters I had for my own personal statement back in the day. And then I sort of found out on the day that I had to cut 50 characters. So yes, you can't actually submit it if it is over that character limit. It is quite a small character limit, but it's just because we want you to focus on those points that we want to hear about. We don't have endless time and we've got too many personal statements to read. So it really has to be relevant to the points that we want to hear from you. So the skills, your super-curriculars, your interests, we just want you to be focused on that. Another really good question, does it have to flow like it is an essay or not really, since it's separated into 3 questions? I would say the individual responses to the questions have to flow, not necessarily all of the responses together. So response 1 has to flow, response 2 has to flow, response 3 has to flow, but you don't have to make the whole document flow like an essay because it is no longer an essay. But that being said, spelling, grammar, having a good flow, punctuation, paragraphs, all of those lovely, lovely things that we very much use here in the humanities, those still are very much applicable. So yes, so not the whole thing, but yeah, the individual responses do have to flow. If you do want to make references between those responses as well, that's absolutely fine. Or if you want to kind of have a continuation between the responses, that's also completely fine. But it's not an essay anymore, so not as significant. A lot of questions about how many areas of law you have to focus on, and really there's not a right answer to this. It might be one area that you're interested in, it might be 5. Doesn't really matter for us. We're more what's the word I was looking for? We care more about your specific interests, and those could be in one area or it could be in 5. So yeah, don't feel like you have to touch on different areas of law just to impress us, basically, and to show a breadth of knowledge. If you want to focus on 2 or 3, that's completely fine. Realistically, because you're applying to 5 universities, it might be a bit better to focus on a few more just to make sure that your statement is applicable to all of the 5. But again, that's very much up to your specific interests. And try not to focus on like 10 or 20 though. That's a bit too many. And it probably doesn't give you enough time to develop your interest in any of them. Okay? So just going through the questions. Somebody said, a really good question actually about punctuation and grammar. There's a few of those. Could you use an app like Grammarly for punctuation and grammar while absolutely. While you are writing your personal statement? Yes, why not? On like your Google document or whatever. I would be very, very weary of using AI. And that is something that will probably be a bigger discussion in the months to come. But I would not recommend using AI for your personal statement because, first of all, it doesn't show us the way you write, your writing style. It doesn't show us your personality. And it does also very much increase the risk of plagiarism of you and another statement that is submitted through our system, okay? And at the end of the day, it just doesn't allow us to see who you are. It doesn't allow us to see your skills, your interests, the way you express yourself, your clarity of thought. Those are all things we want to see. And you're definitely not allowed to use AI while you're here with us for the essays you submit. So, it's not a good place to start in your personal statement, okay? There's a lot of questions about super-curriculars. I mentioned quite a few of those. But yeah, webinars, books, mock taste lectures, work experience, all of those things. There's a lot of questions about super-curriculars. So I'm trying to focus on the ones that are about personal statements a little bit more. Does doing excursions or trips like the Exploring Your conference that we have in April, is that a super-curricular? Is it advantageous to do super-curriculars or to mention super-curriculars that are run by Cambridge? So doing them absolutely counts as a super-curricular. Fantastic. Do mention it if you want to, or if you feel like it helped you build your legal skills and your legal interests. Absolutely counts. Any kind of relevant trip that you've done, or school trip to a university or anything like that. Mentioning things that you did with Cambridge doesn't necessarily give you an advantage. In fact, it gives you no advantage. Don't just mention things that you did through Cambridge or with Cambridge in your personal statement just because you're applying to Cambridge. And that goes for any university that you apply to. There's not really an advantage. If you want to mention them for the sake of the skills that you built, absolutely fine. That being said, there's no advantage just because the name Cambridge is there. Yeah, so lots of questions about areas of law. I think we've already sort of touched on that. And there's a lot of questions as well about is it better to be more sort of narrow-minded or have a wider state of mind? Again, this touches on how many areas of law should I be talking about, but we don't really care. I mean, for the Cambridge course in particular, it's obviously a course that's a general law course. It's not an international law course, not a human rights law course. So we do want to see that you're able to think about different aspects of law and that you're ready to be in an environment where you're dealing with different aspects of law on your everyday teaching life. Now, that being said, we don't want to have the overall lawyer who is interested in every single aspect of law, in every single case that has ever happened. We do want to see that people have specific interests and that they have done their research. But I guess that really touches on what I said in the beginning of the presentation, which was you have to see the individual universities. You have to see what skills they are looking for, what their courses look like, to decide what approach you should take. Some universities will be looking for people that are ready to do general law courses, or for people that might be, hyper focused on one aspect of law. That is kind of your own work to do that research and to decide. So yeah, I would say if you are looking for Cambridge in specific, it is probably a little bit better to have a wider set of interests and to prove that you're ready to study different aspects of law. But again, that doesn't include all the hundreds of aspects of law that exist. It just includes a couple rather than just one singular one. Right? Just going. Yeah, some questions about supercurriculars, and if I don't do the standard law supercurriculars, should I still mention them? Absolutely, yes. If you don't do debating or UN conferences or work experience, you should still mention your supercurriculars, because as I said in the presentation, it is a lot more about what you took away from them rather than just the activities themselves. It's a lot more important to break down your thoughts and your skills and your interests and what you find surprising than just the name of the supercurricular. You could be someone who's done all of the right things, all of the conferences, all of the debating, but actually not reflected on those things you did at all. Or you might be somebody who read a book and watched a documentary, so you didn't necessarily have to travel very much to do the supercurriculars, but you've actually really got good thoughts on those. You followed up on your supercurriculars, you made connections in your supercurriculars. That's really, really good. And that's a point as well. Making connections between your supercurriculars, that's really, really important. Don't just try to list them. It's so much better to say that you've watched a documentary and then maybe you found something really interesting and you followed up on that with a book or work experience or whatever it might be. So much better to do that if you possibly can. Try to have a journey, as one says, of your supercurriculars, to really try and make a thread between them to explain how you went from sort of point A to point B. That is something that can make people really stand out as well, and a really good sign of an effective and competitive statement. Actually seeing the journey the student went through to explore their interests and to explore the law by saying, I read this, it piqued my interest, and then I went to read something else as well to discover that interest further or to explore that interest further. Does attending this webinar count as a supercurricular? I wouldn't really say so, because this webinar is more of an information session. For something to count as a supercurricular, it has to be more subject focused. So learning about the subject and learning about sort of subtopics on that subject. Right now, I'm just telling you more about admissions rather than I'm telling you about the law or aspects of the law, basically. A lot of questions about the EPQs. Do I mention the EPQs in my personal statement, and if so, where? Again, in terms of where, I would say depends what you took away from your EPQ and why you're mentioning it. If you mention it for more kind of not study skills, but like skills like argumentation and essay writing, and all the sorts of things, then maybe you could mention it in section 1, because that is, sorry, not section 2, not section 1, because that's where your formal education comes in. But if you want to mention it, for example, because you did your APQ and then you found something that really inspired you, and that's why you want to do law, then you put it more in section 1. So it sort of depends why you're mentioning it. And there's a lot of questions about specific activities and where do you put them, very much dependent on what you're mentioning them for. So look at the question itself and see what question it's more relevant. Get away from the sort of list mindset and think more about using supercurriculars as evidence of the points you're making and the responses you're making. Yeah. There's a few questions about points that I've covered in the presentation, so I will say that this webinar is recorded and you can catch up on it later. So if you've asked something that I've already mentioned in the presentation, you can always go back and have a look as well. Yeah, some questions about again supercurricular, quite a popular one. How do I know if it's a supercurricular or an extracurricular? Supercurricular related to law, extracurricular not related to law. So hopefully that is that kind of clear things up. But it might have to be an individual decision whether you basically put something down as a supercurricular or as an extracurricular. Think about, does it relate to law? Did it help me with applying to law? Will it help me with studying law? And then is the time to decide what question you can sort of put it under and whether it is a supercurricular or extracurricular. Really good question. Should we strike a balance between the three personal statement question, or does it not matter? Is there a specific question that we should give more weighting to? Very, very good question. I would say you shouldn't be giving specific weightings to any questions. You should really be trying your best and answering your best in all of them, and you should really be showing your best version in all of those questions. You absolutely should try to be doing that. Both in terms of how much you write. So try, not to have 350 characters in the first and then 4,000 or 3,000 even on the third section. Try to definitely balance that word count a little bit. But also the points that you're making, you should be paying attention to all of those three questions and answering with relevant examples in all three questions, okay? Because we will be reading all three of them. And, it's kind of like when it used to be a text. We're going to read the entire statement, so this way we will read all of those questions. Some questions about academic achievements. What is it good to mention? Should I mention academic achievements? Yes and no, in a way. So academic achievements, so things like coming first in your class or getting an A star on a mock or something. Yes, absolutely. Feel free to mention those. That's really, really good. But make sure you don't dwell on your sort of academics and your formal education achievements as much. Because we do have a lot of that data already, we've got your GCSE grades. We'll very likely know if you're first on your in your class among other people because you will have a teacher reference as well. We might know about your mocks as well from that teacher reference. So you're really kind of spending time telling us about things you already know. So do mention those things as evidence of how you've explored the law. Mention those things as evidence of your dedication and of your legal aptitude. But we do recommend that if you can't, you focus a little bit more on supercurricular activities instead, for the sole reason that we just don't know, do not know about those. We not know them from your teacher reference. We don't know about them from the rest of your application. So that is the things we really should hear about. But yes, absolutely do mention your academic achievements as well, where they are relevant. Another interesting question, actually. Does taking my GCSE and or A-levels count as evidence of time management or organizational skills? It can do, but I would probably try to mention something else that you've done outside of those that shows your time management and organizational skills, because a lot of your formal education is dictated and led by your school. So it's not really up to you how you organize them and how you divide your time between them. Of course, there is an element of you doing that when you've got homework and things, but because the schedule itself is very much dictated by the school and the content is dictated by the school, they're not as strong evidence of time management as other extra or supercurriculars might be. Another really good question. In case of mature students or people with non-conventional education, what should we focus on in the section of formal education? Really good question. I will actually say we've got a mature student webinar as well that we ran yesterday, and the recording is up on our YouTube channel. So lots of good information there if you go look at it. But the sort of short answer is mention what is most recent, so your most recent formal education, and or it might be a combination of the two, what is most relevant to law. So what qualification do you feel built your legal skills and your legal interests more? Hopefully you do have one of the things that you've done that is a bit more related to law, maybe helped you more in the process than the other one. Or it might be that you got a couple of skills from one and interest from the second. So you mentioned both. But yeah, the kind of big, I suppose, overarching rule is most relevant and most recent when it comes to people with non-conventional educational pathways or people applying after professional experience. If you're somebody with professional experience as well, that might have been really useful and it's very much worth mentioning if you feel like it built your skills too and that it helped you to study law and will help you to study law. Okay, I'm speaking quite a lot, so my throat is hashing a little. There's a lot of questions about specific supercurriculars. I'm not going to answer specific supercurriculars, whether they count or not. I will just say if they're relevant to law, build your legal skills, build your legal interests, then they are relevant. So, don't worry. Okay, I think I'm going to do another 2 questions. I realize there's quite a few more questions, but I would encourage you to, if you can, either email those to me after the webinar or go look at all of the wonderful information we've got on our websites to learn more about this. Very good question, actually. What is the tone of my personal statement? Is it more academic and formal, or is it more passionate and engaging? Really good question. I would say that the tone has to be definitely formal. It is a formal text, for 3 pieces of text, I guess, that are read by university professors and people in admissions teams. However, it doesn't have to be formal for the sake of being formal. So it shouldn't have to be something that doesn't come naturally to you, is what I'm trying to say. So don't try to use fancy terminology if you don't understand what it actually means. Don't try to make points that are really intellectual or mention books that are really intellectual if you're not quite sure what those mean, or if you don't have opinions on them. But yeah, keep the tone relatively formal. I would say more than formal, it has to be direct and straightforward and clear. Because as I mentioned, we do read so many of these personal statements. And so it has to be really easy for us to spot what you're trying to say. So do avoid the really, really flowery, really, really sort of poetic language as well. Not too formal, not too poetic, clear and direct. And absolutely, it has to be passionate. It has to be passionate. It has to be engaging. We have to be able to see your interest and that you're really enthusiastic, but not to the point that it becomes super flowery and super poetic. So somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I would say clear, direct is the best you can do. Okay, I'm going to get one last question, so I'm going to have to very carefully pick which one that will be. Okay, so I'll focus on one that actually has come up a few times, which is people being a bit worried that it's difficult to make the supercurriculars that you mentioned relevant to all of the 5 courses that you're applying to. And I do understand that on one way, but if you are applying to law at Cambridge or elsewhere, it is very likely you will be applying to law in other universities as well. So I don't think it's very common that you're applying to law at Cambridge and you're applying for maths elsewhere. So realistically, most supercurriculars you mentioned, most skills and interests you mentioned will be relevant to all 5 universities that you're applying to. The exception to this is really, really niche interests or really, really niche topics or papers offered by universities. And I would say maybe avoid being so hyper-specific. If you do avoid mentioning specific, papers or seminar papers offered by different universities, I don't see a reason why your personal statement will not fit all of the 5 universities that you're applying to. If you're applying for law, or even if you're applying for kind of general humanities courses, the skills are very, very similar. But then the supercurriculars that you mentioned, the interests that you mentioned you have, if you're applying for law, will be very, very, very similar as well. So as long as you avoid mentioning hyper-specific things that a specific university offers, then I think you should really, really be fine. Just focus on the skills that you feel are similar. Focus on maybe papers that they offer or topics that they offer that are similar across 4 or 5 of those universities, and you should be golden, I would say. And that's why I said in the beginning of the presentation that it's really good if you can make a list of all of the different skills and experiences that the universities you're applying to are looking for. It will really, really, really help you to make a list of all the ones that are identical and the ones that might not be identical as well. All right, I think I'm going to have to end it here, although there's so many questions still. I do apologize for not being able to get to all of your questions, but please, please, please do email them to me, or you can watch back on the webinar as well, because I know that the responses to some of them are in the presentation, the recording of the webinar. So yeah, and there's so much information online as well about personal statements. There's so much information on our own website and on the Cambridge website as well. So do go and have a look at those, as they do respond to some of the really, really major questions and worries you might have, as does the UCAS website. The UCAS website has fantastic advice, especially for the new format of the personal statement that might not be as well explored so far, and maybe your teachers don't have as much advice as they would have for the previous format. So your UCAS website should be your first port of call for anything personal statement related. But we do have more webinars in this series. Our next one is actually about law interviews at Cambridge. So if you're interested, please do go and sign up via the link on our website that my colleague has very helpfully put in the chat box. So you can go, sorry, he's not put the link to that, I misread it. So she's put a very, very useful link to our Think Cambridge Law blog. And our Think Cambridge Law blog is a blog that we run here at the faculty, and a post that we did recently was actually about super-curriculars, and is all about the different super-curriculars you can do, what's relevant to law, what isn't, suggestions of things that you might be able to do. So do go and have a read of that, because I know so many of you are asked about super-curriculars, and I think that post is really quite useful. And he's also very helpfully linked to the BA Law website as well, where all of this advice can be given about super-curriculars, about personal statements, interviews, all of that. But yes, as I said, our next webinar is on interviews. And we have got 4 other webinars after that one as well, about a legal career, entering a legal career, working a legal career, and we will also have current lawyers as panelists to share their experiences. So lots of exciting things to come. But for now, thank you so very much for attending. We really hope to see you in one of our next webinars, and we wish you a lovely rest of the week and a lovely rest of the evening as well. Bye.